December 25, 1968, 601 Mountain Drive, Beverly Hills. The living room is a diorama of perfect Christmas, a 10-foot silver tree shimmering with 1,000 blue lights reflected in the polished lacquer of a grand piano. Presents spill across a white rug, the scent of pine and roasting chestnuts. On the sofa, Dean Martin watches his children laugh, their faces glowing in the television's light. He holds a highball glass. The ice has melted. He hasn't taken a sip in 20 minutes. The phone rings, not the cheerful jangle of the house line. This is a lower, more insistent purr from the study, a private line. Dean doesn't move. His wife Jean looks at him, a question in her eyes. He gives a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The ringing stops. A moment later, the housekeeper appears in the doorway, her face pale. "It's for you, Mr. Martin," he says. "It's urgent." Dean stands. He doesn't sigh. He doesn't complain. He just detaches. As he walks from the warm, noisy living room into the dark, wood-paneled silence of his study, it's as if he's crossing a border into another country, a colder one. He picks up the receiver. He doesn't speak. He listens. The voice on the other end is smooth, congenial. It wishes him a Merry Christmas. It asks after the family. And then, almost as an afterthought, it says, "Sam was thinking about you the other day. He told that story again, the one about the old barber. Gets a laugh every time." A pause. Dean says nothing. The voice continues, softer now. "It'd be a shame, Dino, a real shame if that story got out. In the papers, on the TV. People might get the wrong idea. About you, about your associations." Another pause. "Maybe we should talk after the holidays, for old time's sake." Dean Martin closes his eyes. In the reflection of the study's dark window, he doesn't look like the king of cool. He looks like a man standing at the edge of a cliff he's been backing towards for 20 years. He finally speaks, his voice a dry whisper. "Tell Sam," he says, "that my father was a better man than he'll ever be, and tell him we have nothing to talk about." He hangs up. Not a slam, a precise, final click. He stands there in the dark for a long time, staring at his own ghost in the glass. This wasn't the first call, it wouldn't be the last. But this was the Christmas he realized the past wasn't past, it was just waiting on hold. To understand the atomic weight of that moment, you have to rewind the tape past the glitter, past the casinos, past the Rat Pack hijinks. You have to go to the source of the smoke. Steubenville, Ohio, 1917. The air tastes of coal dust and forged steel. Gitano Guy Crosti arrives from Italy, hands already hardened by work, dreams narrowed to survival. He becomes a barber, a simple, honest trade. The shop is a sanctuary of hot towels, sharp scissors, and the low murmur of immigrant men speaking in the old language, worrying about the new world. His son, Dino, grows up in this atmosphere, a cloud of talcum powder, bay rum, and quiet desperation. Young Dino is his mother's son, beautiful and sweet-voiced, but he sees the weariness in his father's eyes, the resignation, the unspoken agreement that life is about endurance, not joy. Guy Crosti loves his son, but his love is a worried, heavy thing. He sees the boy's easy charm, his aversion to the grime of the steel mills, his knack for numbers and cards, and he fears it. In his world, nothing that comes easy is honest, so he calls him the bum, Il Fanalone. It's not a mean joke. It's a prophecy he's trying to avert. Every compliment Dean would ever receive, every roar of applause, would be filtered through that first, foundational judgment. You are not a serious man. So Dino leaves. He runs towards the very things his father distrusts. The night, the music, the gamble, Cleveland, the Colony Club. It's here in these backrooms that smell of stale beer and danger that a different kind of father figure emerges. The men who run these operations aren't weary. They're powerful. They wear sharp suits, drive big cars, and command fear with a glance. They see something in the handsome, quiet kid dealing blackjack. He's respectful, he's smart, he doesn't flinch. To a young man desperate to prove he's not a bum, this is a potent alternative gospel. Here you are measured by your nerve, your loyalty, your ability to keep your mouth shut. It's a twisted mirror of his father's values, honor, family, silence. But the family is a famiglia of a different sort. The war intervenes, a chaotic pause, but the connections hold. Post-war America is a wild frontier of opportunity, especially in the gray zones between law and ambition. Dean's rise as a singer is meteoric, but it's not a solo flight. The bookings in crucial cities, Chicago, New York, Miami, come with a certain ease. Troublesome rivals for stage time mysteriously back out. Union organizers suddenly become agreeable. Dean is never told the specifics. He doesn't need to be. The system simply works for him. He meets Jerry Lewis, and the rocket ship ignites. But even Martin and Lewis, a phenomenon so big it seems to exist in its own universe, is not immune to gravity. Their manager, a former songplugger named Mac Gray, is more than a manager. He's a fixer, a bridge, and the bridges he knows how to cross lead to places the IRS wouldn't find on a map. By the time the duo explodes in 1956, Dean is already deeply, irrevocably woven into the tapestry. It's not about fear, it's about symbiosis. He provides legitimacy, star power, a front of dazzling normalcy. They provide certainty. In an industry of chaos, they are the ultimate insurance policy. When he plays the Copa in New York, the best table is always held. When he opens at the Sands in Vegas, the high rollers appear like magic. His luck at the craps tables is the stuff of legend. But in this world, luck is just another word for a carefully curated gift. This is the hidden engine of the Rat Pack's glory days. The summit at the Sands in 1960 isn't just a bunch of pals having fun. It's a strategic display of power. Sinatra, with his own complex web of ties, is the general. Dean is the lieutenant, the beloved face of the operation. Sammy is the dazzling talent. Their laughter echoes through a casino that was, in essence, a bank for the hidden economy of a nation. And Dean is the perfect front man. His persona, the lovable, tipsy, indifferent crooner, is a masterpiece of misdirection. Who would suspect the man who can barely remember the lyrics of his own songs to be a sharp, calculating, and deeply entangled business partner? He played the fool so brilliantly, the world never saw the chess master. But every partnership has a balance sheet, and for men like Sam Giancana, the balance was measured in deference. In the unspoken understanding that no matter how high Dean flew, the string was still in their hands, an occasional favor. A percentage of a side business, the use of his name to open doors, it was a tax on success. And Dean paid it, for years, with a smile that never reached the checkbook. The cracks begin not with a bang, but with a series of quiet humiliations. A request that Dean perform at a private birthday party for an associate in a Chicago suburb. Not a show, a command performance. Dean goes, he sings, he tells jokes, he smiles, and he hates every minute of it. Another time, a suggestion that he invest in a new resort in the Bahamas. The paperwork is confusing, the returns never materialize, but the investment is non-negotiable. The pressure is a constant, low-grade fever. It's in the bodyguards who are less protectors than monitors. It's in the gifts that are really receipts. The golden handcuffs are tightening, and they're starting to chafe. And then Gaetano Crosti dies in 1967. The quiet barber from Steubenville passes away, having lived to see his son become one of the most famous men on the planet. The obituaries call Dean a devoted son. The funeral is small, private, steeped in a grief Dean can't fully articulate. It's more than loss. It's the closing of a door to a part of himself he'd spent a lifetime running from, and now desperately wished he could reclaim. The unresolved tension, the need for his father's approval, the resentment of his father's judgment, solidifies into a single, heavy stone of regret. He had bought the man everything except the one thing he wanted, his understanding. So when Dean returns to Vegas, when he takes the stage at the Sands just weeks later, he is a man in a fragile, volatile state of mourning. And it is in this state that Sam Giancana, a man who understands power but not psychology, decides to test the leash. The night of January 26, 1967, arrives. The details of the joke itself are lost, deliberately buried. Those who heard it repeated backstage said it wasn't particularly clever. It was just ugly. It reduced Gaetano's life, his struggles, his dignity, to a crude punchline about cheap haircuts and immigrant stupidity. It was the kind of joke told by a man who believes he owns not just your present, but your past. Who believes every part of you is a commodity he can appraise and ridicule. The message is delivered to Dean as he's about to go on. He doesn't react, he just nods. The curtain goes up, the spotlight hits, and for the next 55 minutes, Dean Martin gives one of the most technically perfect, emotionally vacant performances of his life. He is a ghost in a tuxedo. The audience feels it, a slight chill in the room they can't identify. They applaud, but the connection, that magical, effortless connection Dean always forged, is absent. He has walled himself off behind a pane of bulletproof glass. And then comes the hallway. Forget the myth of the defiant gangster showdown. It wasn't a scene from a film noir. It was colder, quieter, more profoundly terrifying. Dean didn't storm into Giancana's booth. He didn't make a grand statement. Grand statements get you killed. He used the oldest weapon in the book, a refusal to engage. By sending the message, "We are done talking," he wasn't declaring war. He was enacting a disappearance. He was removing himself from the ecosystem. In the world of tacit understandings, this was the ultimate breach of contract. It was saying the silent agreement was now void. The immediate aftermath was not violent. It was bureaucratic. The machinery of inconvenience began to grind. A planned expansion of Dean's production company hit unexplained regulatory snags. A key investor in a film project pulled out, citing atmosphere. More subtly, the flow of insider perks, the sure-thing tips, the access to private events, the seamless handling of any potential scandal dried up. Dean was now operating in the open market, and the open market, he discovered, was a ruthless, inefficient place. He was being shown, in a dozen small ways, how much of his effortless success had been engineered. But the psychological warfare was far more effective. The calls. The Christmas call was just one in a series, always friendly, always reminding. They never threatened him directly. They threatened the narrative. They would murmur about old stories coming out, stories about his early days in Cleveland, about the true ownership of certain clubs, about where the seed money for some ventures really came from. They were threatening to strip the paint off the beautiful legend, to reveal the rust and primer underneath. For a man whose entire life was a meticulously crafted performance, this was a threat more existential than any physical harm. And here is the devastating, unspoken heart of the confession. Part of Dean believed they were right. The ghost of his father whispered it. "You are a bum. You didn't build this on your own. You took shortcuts. You danced with the devil, and now the bill is due." The public humiliation wasn't just about scandal. It was about the validation of his deepest, oldest fear. That Guy Crosty had been right all along. This internal fracture is what you see in the late 60s and 70s. The workaholism, the deepening distance from friends, the way the drinking shifted from a prop to a refuge. He built a fortress of solitude in Beverly Hills, complete with its own bar, its own screening room, its own golf tee in the backyard. He controlled every molecule of his environment because he could no longer control the narrative of his past. The king of cool became the prisoner of 601 Mountain Drive. He tried to break free in the only way he knew how, by buying his way out. Not with cash, that was too direct, an admission of guilt. He did it with performances. There's a reason in the early 70s that Dean did a series of shows at military bases, for police benevolence associations, for fiercely patriotic, law and order organizations. He was laundering his reputation in public service. He was building a new public record, one of unwavering Americanism, to paper over the whispers of the underworld. It was a brilliant, heartbreaking strategy. He was using his talent to pay down a moral mortgage. The final crushing irony came in 1974. His son, Dean Paul Dino Martin, the golden boy, the tennis pro, the clean-cut heartthrob, decides to become a pilot. Not just any pilot, an officer in the California Air National Guard. He puts on a uniform. He serves his country. He is the embodiment of the serious, honorable man his grandfather, Giancana, had always wanted his own son to be. Dean was reportedly bursting with a pride so profound it was tinged with agony. His son had achieved, through sheer straight-arrow effort, the legitimacy his father had spent a lifetime chasing and compromising to attain. Dino's uniform was a silent, loving rebuke to every shadowy deal, every whispered conversation, every backroom handshake that had built the Martin empire. When Dean Paul Martin died in a tragic F-4 Phantom crash in 1987, a part of Dean died with him, not just the father's heart, but the last flickering hope of redemption. The pure, unsullied legacy was gone. So what is the true legacy of that night at the Sands? It's not a story of a mobster and a star. It's a Greek tragedy played out in neon and tuxedos. It's the story of a son forever caught between two father figures, one who gave him life and a burden of shame, and others who gave him the world and a burden of debt. His calm response was the moment he chose which burden to carry. He chose the shame, because shame, in the end, came from a place of love, however flawed. Debt came from a place of ownership. He spent the next 2 decades paying for that choice not in blood, but in pieces of his soul. The smile became a museum piece, the laughter an echo in an empty room. He lived with the haunting knowledge that he had defeated the external monster, only to find it had taken up permanent residence inside him, in the shape of his father's disappointed eyes. Hollywood tells you the legend, the unflappable drink-in-hand icon who nothing could touch. The truth is far more human and far more devastating. Dean Martin was a man who touched everything and was touched by everything in return. The soot of Steubenville, the grease paint of Broadway, the cold cash of Vegas, and the ghostly, lingering hand of a barber from the old world, whose approval was the only jackpot his famous son never managed to hit. The calm response wasn't cool. It was the quiet sound of a man, at long last, choosing his pain, and then spending the rest of his life learning just how expensive that choice could be. This is Hollywood Untold Files. We peel back the velvet curtain to show you the rusted machinery behind the dream. If stories like this, stories of impossible choices and the ghosts that collect on the other side of fame, matter to you, then you're already part of this excavation. Help us keep digging. Subscribe. Share this with someone who still believes the old stories have something left to teach us. Because in the end, every legend is just a truth, sanded smooth by time and wishful thinking. Our job is to find the sharp edges they left behind, the edges that can still draw blood.